Welcome Geoff Holroyd to the stage, and he's going to talk to us about owls. So Dr. Geoff Holroyd, his interest in birds developed as a teenager when he was an active volunteer starting in 1961 and later as chairman of the Long Point Bird Observatory. He earned his master's degree and PhD from the University of Toronto for his studies of the foraging strategies and diets of swallows. He retired in 2012 after 36 years with the Canadian Wildlife Service. And he did studies including peregrine falcons and burrowing owls. He chaired the national recoveries team. Among other things, he tracked the results of the Edmonton Christmas bird count for 40 years and has been involved in organizing two Western Canadian bird banding conferences, the most recent in 2019. He's now the chair of the Beaverhill Bird Observatory, and he recently co-authored the new book, Wildlife of the North, and that's a very recent publication of August 2023. His latest research project is to track the northern saw-whet owls from the Beaverhill Bird Observatory to around North America using the MODIS wildlife tracking system. So there's so many questions and topics in there, and we will hand it over to Geoff to tell us all about his research.
Great. Thanks, Danny, for that introduction. I wish we could catch 200 saw-whet owls at once. That would be pretty amazing. I can't imagine handling 200 harlequin ducks. That was great. So I'd like to, as Danny said, talk to you about saw-whet owls. And I made up this sort of long, rambling introduction that really, do we know what saw-whet owls are doing? Certainly from my updated Western perspective, I don't think we do anymore. Going back to 1960s and then 1975, John Woods, who's on this call, and I were interested in looking at band recoveries and discovered we were both working on it. So we teamed up and came up with these maps in, I forget what year they're up to, early 1970s anyway. And I think we even suggested the Appalachians might be hindering migration of saw-whets crossing them because we had no band recoveries going across the Appalachians. Of course, we know that's not true now, but that's what we thought almost 50 years ago. And the other thing we were able to do from the banding, John pulled this part together, is look at simply the raw dates that birds were banded and look at the chronology of banding. The spring is in the top there, where the birds are apparently moving north in March into Michigan into May. And of course, there's no banding in the west at this point. And then in the fall, in the bottom part there, and one of the interesting things that jumps out, there were over 1,000 birds at that point had been banded in Ontario, more than anywhere else. And that was partly, I wouldn't say John and I did all of that, but we were certainly keen owl banders even before the days of playback. So back then, we used to go out to the islands off Toronto in Ontario, and the saw-whets would be roosting in the willows, and you put a noose gently over their head, snug it up, and then reach in and grab them and band them and let them go. So, but we didn't have playback back then. So I'm going to move now to the 1980s when I moved to Edmonton and got involved in the local Christmas bird count, which is a source of our wintering information on saw-whet owls. And so here is the raw number of saw-whets that were recorded on the Christmas bird count. I moved to Edmonton in '84 and got involved and played a role in creating the largest Christmas bird count ever. So in 1987, we had 1,288 people out catching birds. And by then, we also had a small army of people starting at midnight, going out with, back then there were the little tape recorder playback, playing saw-whet owl calls and other owl calls to detect them. So there are very few saw-whets recorded before '85. There were 2 in the mid '70s, and then a massive number in the 1990s, early 2000s, and that was because of the effort. So clearly saw-whets were there, but the question is, why weren't they recorded earlier? One has to go back to the history of Edmonton. It was a fur trading post, and wood was in great demand. So here's Fort Edmonton in 1871, and there's not a tree to be seen. So the trees were used both for building materials and for fire, for cooking and heat. And then in the 1980s or 1880s, coal was discovered. The fort was actually moved, and coal took over as the main source for heating. So trees were still used for building materials, but coal took over just 150 years ago. However, that left Edmonton denuded of trees, and it's taken a long time for them to grow back. So I'm suggesting part of the reason that there weren't saw-whets is there weren't big trees. And why do we need big trees? As probably most of you know, the saw-whets nest in woodpecker holes, either pileated or flickers. I've just shown the pileated graph here. So here's the number of pileateds recorded on the Edmonton Christmas bird count. And you'll see prior to 1950, there were none recorded, then small numbers until we increased participation in 1986. And participation's actually dropped off, but the number of pileated woodpeckers has continued to grow. So I suggested that to the local naturalist club that this is actually a function of our aging forest, which is now finally 150 years old and has more and more mature trees that are suitable in size for pileated nest holes, which then creates places for the saw-whets to nest. So part of the moral of this little part of the story is you don't know what's out there until you go looking. No one knew there were so many saw-whets until we started doing playback and discovered them. You can see the hours of playback there recorded in red, with the peak in 1987, another one in the early 2000s. And obviously the number of owls recorded is a function of that. Unfortunately, in the last couple of decades, the enthusiasm for going out owling has waned. And so we're recording fewer saw-whets than what we used to do. But if one divides the number of saw-whets seen by the number of hours up to 2013, there actually was more saw-whets recorded per owling hour up to 2013. I didn't show the rest of the graph because it drops off after that because of the lack of participation by people, not the owls. So we now know that saw-whets overwinter in central Alberta, and in some years in fairly high numbers. So what happens during migration? Well, this is our new banding lab out of the Beaverhill Bird Observatory. So I'm now moving you 80 kilometers east of Edmonton. We just built this building in 2000, 2001. Before that, we had a pretty crummy typical banding lab. This is solar powered and it's pretty cool. I have to show a picture of it because we're so proud of it. So we started saw-whet banding in 1997, but standardized it using the techniques that most people are using these days with a male audio lure and 4 mist nets. And the range that it's actually should be 200 to 400. I forgot to update that after looking at the numbers another time. We then added other lures just for general interest. We added a female lure in 2019 to see if that would attract more males. Because if any of you that are trapping know you get mostly females in response to the male lure. In 2012, we added a boreal owl lure, and we've caught up to 3 boreal owls in the fall. It's a lot of work for a few owls, but it's so cool to catch them this far south. And then after watching long-eared owls fly into our clearing and back out again at dusk, we finally, a few years ago, put up a call playback for long-eared owls, and we've caught up to 25 in a season. We caught, I think it was 12 this year. So what happens in the fall here? Often we go from the top picture to the bottom picture in about a week. So a year ago, we had the warmest October ever. And in the first week of November, we set daily all-time record lows. So the owls have got to be either determined to spend the winter here or get out of Dodge and head south. So here's some data that we've collected. The number of owls in the early years this is the raw numbers, is partly lower because of the lack of hours put in. So initially we would only do 4 hours in September and 6 in October. We now do 6 hours in September and 7 hours in October, partly because we have more dedicated staff. So you can see the numbers have varied. No super periodicity, roughly a peak every 3 years, but it's not a perfect 3-year cycle. And we were hoping for even more in 2023. It did increase over 2020, so we'll see what happens next year, whether this is a peak or not. And we average about 250 a year. And as I mentioned, as probably most of you know, the yellow line there shows the number of hatch years. Majority of birds that we catch are hatch years, but there are quite a few after hatch years shown in blue, and the peaks don't always align. So I don't have a quantitative analysis, but the number of young and the number of adults don't always peak in the same years. So there's more to explore there. In terms of the season, we typically start on September 1st and go till the end of October or sometimes into early November. And you can see a graph of the capture rate through the season, with the peak is roughly October 8th. But we do catch birds into November. We quit early this year for a variety of reasons, but I'm still catching them in my backyard, although not very many. I caught one this year. I live about 20 kilometers from the bird observatory on an acreage, and I can catch birds in my backyard. We were very lucky to have, I should have mentioned my co-authors, I'm sorry. So Sara Pierce-Minerick was our bander in charge, our head bander, and pulled a lot of the data together. And then by luck, Myrthe Van Bremt joined us last year in 2022 as a volunteer who knew R. So I just know R as a letter of the alphabet, but she knows how to do stats. And she had just finished a paper looking at the effect of climate change on timing of saw-whet owls, and I'll show you that paper in a second. So she looked at our data to see, is there any change in the timing of the migration over the 20 years that we've been monitoring them? And so this is the initiation of migration, the 5% passage date. And you can see there's like a 1-day difference over 20 years, which was not significant. However, the mean or median passage date did change dramatically. It's not quite significant, but I'll show you in a minute why it's biologically significant. It's just a sample size issue, but they're changing their migration by 2 days a decade. So they're now migrating later in the season than what they did 20 years ago. But the end of the season, I guess I left that graph out. The end of the season is not getting later. So it seems like they're migrating, the peak of them's later, but the timing is not shifted. And you can see it's the change in the timing of migration is similar for hatchers and after hatchers, with the hatchers possibly delaying a couple of more days than the hatchers are in their peak of migration. So at the start of the end of their migration doesn't appear to have changed over 20 years, but the median date is now 4 days later over 20 years. So this research follows Myrthe's master's thesis. This is from an article that's now published in Wilson's Bulletin. Unfortunately, I should have written out the reference, but if you look up Saw-whet owls in the last 2 or 3 or 4 issues, you'll find this publication. So Myrthe took the banding data from 7 banding stations, 1 in Quebec, 1 in Ontario, and then a group in the New England states there, or I think they're called New England states. Hope they are. And analyzed the changes over time. And she's the one that first established that, in fact, the migration date for the mean or the median, the passage date, is actually later now than it was, and the data set there is 30 years old, whereas the start and the end of the migration dates are not significantly changed. So I'm suggesting that the Beaverhill data is following the same trend, but we were just one station with lots of annual variation, whereas Myrthe had access to 7 banding stations data with lots of scatter there, but still a significant trend showing that they're migrating later than what they used to. She also had these cool graphics, which I can't avoid showing. They take a moment to understand. So her logic here is that 1 is 100% of the owls have yet to move. And then as they move, the graph goes down until 100% of them are moved. So each line represents a year. And the more dark the image shows you where the bulk of the migration is happening. So you can see the dark is fairly early in the season in the first half, and then gets darker in the second half, showing that transition over the 30 years of data. And this is a similar kind of graph drawn for BBO, showing that there's more depth to the lines, more darker lines below the 50% than there were in the start. But we don't have as many lines to make it nice and dark the way her paper does. And then she also looked at the timing a slightly different way than John Woods and I did. I think the letter R had been invented when John and I were writing our paper, but not the statistics for sure. So you can see here, if my cursor were up here, the light purple line is Tadoussac, showing the earlier movement of those birds. Julian dates is at the bottom here. September 7th is number 250, where the graph starts. So you can see the Tadoussac birds moving earlier than they do at Prince Edward Point in Ontario, and then a whole cluster of the New England ones, Pennsylvania in there, and then the Assateague coastal birds moving last. And I think maybe, I know there's some Eastern banders on this webinar. Look at how late they were moving. So December 16th is number 350, the end of the graph. So they were still moving 20 days before that. So the end of November, they're still picking up birds moving. So I know some of the banders in the east have already quit banding, but if I was out there, I keep going, and I'm still going here and getting the odd bird, even though we're not quite into deep winter yet, but the world's getting cold. So the 50% passage date was not statistically significant at PBO, but I think it's just as significant as the Myrthe's paper. And all of those show the importance of long-term monitoring, having 20 and even 30 years of data to track. But still, we need to understand the actual movements, the direction. So we've talked about the timing of migration. So where do they move? So I'm not going to go through these. These are maps from eBird, from the Cornell website. This is the breeding range. And you can see, I guess my bias now, since I live in Alberta, is looking at the prairies. They're abundant throughout the northern portion of Alberta. For some reason, less so in Saskatchewan. And on migration, they fill up that gap, and they're migrating throughout Alberta and Saskatchewan. In the winter, according to eBird, they're not here, but I think we're going to be changing that over time. There are also more and more pictures of birds in the winter being posted. So this map is going to be shown slightly out of date. I'm not sure if there's anyone on the webinar from Rocky Point Bird Observatory. They're based at the southern end of Vancouver Island, where the pointer is. And they, with 2 banding stations, catch over 1,000 birds a season. And their opening night, they caught over 100 birds between the 2 stations. And you can see why, when you look at this map, the number of sightings on eBird certainly peaks in that area. Pre-beating migration, they're more continuous across the boreal forest. But this is a graph that a map I'm working towards. Often on eBird maps, there's a nice clear line at the top, which is a breeding range. There might be an overlap with the year-round range, and then there's a nice clean color at the bottom. Look at the mess that saw-whets have given us in terms of a patchwork of year-round breeding, non-breeding, pre-beating, post-beating. It's a real mishmash of information. And so what I'm leading to, obviously, is how do we try and sort this out with either our current knowledge or new technologies. So I'll give you an idea of the movements from Beaverhill. In 2021, we caught a bird that had been banded as a nestling in South Dakota. Harold Fisher caught a couple of our owls in central Saskatchewan. We caught an owl from Pennsylvania, from Scott Wiesenthal's banding stations there, 2 years after they had banded it. And then more remarkably, a couple of weeks later, a bird that we banded went to the same banding station in Pennsylvania in 25 days, 3,000 kilometers. So clearly an eastern component to the migration. And this paper by Lisa Priestley et al. In Raptor Research 2010, you can see the bulk of the movements of band recoveries of owls from Alberta and Saskatchewan were to the east into the Great Lakes and beyond. There was 2 from Lesser Slave Lake north of us, still in Alberta, that went down into Montana. 1 from central Saskatchewan went down to Colorado, and then 1 going out to the coast. So although the bulk of the birds moved east, there's also this tendency of some birds at least to go south and west. The one catch is there's way more banding stations to the east of us than there are to the south of us, south of Alberta. So that then leads to looking at a new technology, the MODIS tracking system. I'm assuming you're mostly familiar with it. I won't spend a lot of time on it, but it's a system of putting nanotags on small birds, mostly passerines, some shorebirds, and then they're picked up by monitoring stations that are actively listening for the nanotags to fly by. So the stations can pick up the tags 15 kilometers away in open air, 15-kilometer radius. And you can see there's way more stations in the eastern North America than there are in the west, but there are some clusters of stations south of us here in Montana and around Missoula. There's over 40 stations set up by Kate Stone and her collaborators. And then there's also a system of stations up the West Coast looking for Western sandpipers and up the Fraser River Valley. So that gives us a chance of finding out where the birds are going without the same bias that may be resulting from banding stations. So here's where the Edmonton station is located in central Alberta. Here's, I can't help showing another picture of our station. This one doesn't have the solar panels on, but I have to show you our 80-foot communications tower. This was set up partly because we found a used one and that's how high it was, but we also wanted to clear the trees so we could get Wi-Fi and cell coverage, but it also was a perfect platform to put the MODIS antennae on top with the black box that's actually yellow in our maintenance room inside the building. And those of you not familiar with the nano tags, we bought 50. We've deployed 48 actively. They're fairly small. You can see a centimeter ruler here. They weigh 1.5 grams. The bulk, if not all of the ones that have been put on to date, have been put on with a leg harness. I guess my background in putting transmitters on peregrine falcons, prairie falcons, deer falcons, etc., is to put them on a backpack. And I wasn't totally happy with what looked like a lot of tags were put on and nobody had heard from them, which could be the lack of stations to pick them up, but it could also be that the saw-whets are able to reach down and cut the nylon webbing or the nylon fabric that's holding them on the leg bands, on the leg harness, actually sitting on the rump. So I did lots of phoning around and contacting and came up with using Spectra tape that David Johnson in Washington, Oregon has used on other birds, very strong tape, and added it and put it on put the tags in a backpack configuration. We're working on a visual description, a video, and a text description to describe what we've done. But basically, it's 32 centimeters of Spectra tape. We pre-mark it so we know where to put the tag on the tape, where to cross it over the chest, and then where to put it on the back. We sew and glue the crossing points. And this is what it looks like before the bird puts it into their plumage, preens it in, and it disappears with just the antennae sticking out the back end. You might note here, I also added shrink wrap to try and strengthen the base of the antennae. What problem we had with burring owls is that they were able to bend or even break off the antennae if they weren't made stronger. And here's a bird happily wearing a nano tag. It's obviously it's on its back, but you can see the antennae sticking out the bottom there while it's comfortably sleeping the morning after we tagged it in an adjacent forest. So what have we found? This is the exciting part. They're not going east, they're going south. One went southeast into northeast Montana, but the rest of them have gone south into Washington, Idaho, and particularly into the Missoula area of Montana, where 3 have gone. A couple of them are sorry, that one of them has stayed in the Missoula area and 2 have flown down into Idaho. So they're not going east at all, which I thought some would go east given the high density of Motus towers there, but so far none have. So it's pretty exciting to wake up in the morning and check if we've got a new bird. So no birds have moved in recent days. And this is, I point out, this is up to the 10th of November, but there's nothing new even as of an hour or so ago before the talk started. The other cool thing one gets is a record of when the birds are pinging a tower. So I should point out that 8 birds have gone south. That map I just showed you represents 8 birds that have moved. We have 8 birds that appear to have stayed in the area at least for 2 weeks, and some of them for a month. So this is one that's still in the area within 15 kilometers of our tower. We assume they were all migrating through, but so far 8 out of 48 have stuck around at least for a while. But what's also cool about this, so this, if you can read the numbers there, is date on the y-axis and universal time on the x-axis. And it shows when this bird is active within 15 kilometers of our tower, and the tower is able to pick up the pings. So you can see that it's presumably above the forest canopy or far enough away that it's getting pinged over the top of the canopy intermittently through the night. And translating universal time to Mountain Standard Time, it's active from roughly 6 in the evening till 4 in the morning, Mountain Standard Time. And sunset right now is at 5 o'clock. So shortly after sunset and full dark, this owl is out, presumably hunting, but certainly being active enough to ping our tower. So we're getting behavioral information as well as the movement information. That's pretty cool to see. So then what's next? Well, one warning, if you get involved in Motus, if you're addicted to eBird and looking at spring and fall migration, don't go to Motus because you'll get addicted to where are the nanotags going to pop up next. There's hundreds of species and projects that have been put on the Motus website, and it's open source, so you can go look at it. And I don't even check the weather in the morning now. First thing I do is check our map to see if a Motus tag is being picked up elsewhere. So what else do we do at BBO and Saw-whet Owls? We do owl banding events in the evenings. We do them 4 days a week. 2 days we give our staff a rest, and the 7th day is in case we get rained out. Because of the pandemic, we had to limit the number of people attending. So we had up to 70 people turning up on a Saturday night to watch us band owls. And clearly you can't show 70 people what you're doing. So as the pandemic ended, we decided we should ticket the events. And if we're going to ticket them, we may as well ask people to pay for them. And so we charge $25 per person, a limit of 20 people, so that people are getting a good experience 4 nights a week, and it sells out every night. So it's not only become a better experience for the people and a better experience for our staff, but it's become a significant fundraiser to help fund the staff and the whole bird observatory. So we do that for about 6 weeks in the fall, starting mid-September, when there's a reasonable chance of getting owls. We also take birds of prey into the classroom in the winter. We have a program called Bird Smart. Last year we talked to 250 classrooms, 10,000 school children. We charge the schools a nominal fee to help cover the salaries and mileage. We've actually been to Rogers Place, the hockey arena in Edmonton, to both an Oilers game and an Oil Kings game, and being featured on the Videotron at both intermissions. So we're getting a very high profile from our Bird Smart programs. They're almost self-funding, but we get grants to cover the shortfall, and it's a huge boon to educating children. Our talks are targeted at the Alberta curriculum, so they're not just a general talk about birds. They're a talk about birds, bird conservation, and climate change. They're not instilling fear. The purpose is to empower students on things they can do in their own lives to reduce their impact, both on the environment and wildlife habitat, bird habitat, and their carbon footprint and climate. And at the end of the talk, for the last 15 minutes or so, we pull out a live raptor and the kids can come up close. Older classes have cameras, so they do selfies with them, etc. It's a huge hit. We'll be doing 10 days of talks every week this winter, and our schedule is almost filled with teachers wanting us to return. So it's a very successful program, and it employs our banders through the winter so that the next spring, we hope they'll stick around and we don't have to train new people every year, or not as many people. So a last thing I'd like to throw out there is I was just at the Global Owl Conference, where there was quite a few talks about short-eared owls and burrowing owls, and I've organized symposia at Raptor Research on those species in the past, and I'd like to think a bit of the legacy of those symposia are that people are still researching them. There were only 2 talks about saw-whets. So I suggested to some of the folks there, including the vice president of Raptor Research and the chair of their program committee, about organizing a symposium on saw-whets in October 2024 in Charlotte, North Carolina, which is their annual conference. So I'd invite any of you, if you're interested and have a topic you'd like to give a talk to, please contact me. We'll try and put a program together, put a submission to Raptor Research. I know it's in the middle of saw-whet owl banding, and that was one of the concerns that was expressed at the Global Owl Conference, but hopefully there's someone else to cover you if you can come to the symposium and give talks and learn. Hopefully we can start to put together a better picture of what saw-whets are doing. I understand something in the order of 10,000 saw-whets a year are banded, and monitoring OwlNet for the last month or so, there's huge numbers of retraps. So there should be a wealth of information on the movements and timing and condition of these owls. I'm not sure there's any papers on weights and measures and all those kinds of good things that we can use to track the conditions of owls. So I think there's, and then not to mention breeding information. There's a couple of folks on this call. I know Zoltan is on there, and Rick and Dan, they've got nest boxes up. I think we've got a wealth of information about breeding and productivity in the northern part of the range too. So with that, thank the Beaverhill Bird Observatory for their sponsors. I have to throw that in there so when we're reporting on grants, we can say that we just told the world all about them. And thank you for listening. And there's my contact information, chair@Beaverhill Birds. And we have a website, obviously. Thank you. Oh, Danny, you're muted.
I just like to talk by myself. So I wanted to say thank you very much. That was great. You have an adorable study species, so awesome. You also have a beautiful facility. Thank you for sharing. I'm going to put a plug in for those people who are interested more in MODIS. This webinar series is going to continue, and in January we're going to be talking about MODIS. So you can join us if you want to learn about that addiction. It is quite addictive, so you have been warned by Geoff. You asked if there was anyone from Rocky Point, and there was also a question from Rocky Point. Now, Jonica from Rocky Point has had to leave, but I will ask her question. And she said, have you found using the female audio lures brings in more males?
Not particularly, and I should apologize for going late, but I encouraged Cindy to stay as the first speaker, so if I went late, I wasn't impacting her. No, there's really no significant difference. Trying to think of Whitefish Point on the south shore of Lake Superior were the first ones to do it, and they found they were catching more males with the female audio lure. We still catch females and males. I can't give you the percentages offhand, but it's not significantly different, to the point where we said this winter we're going to look at the actual numbers and decide whether it's worth running an extra speaker to try and get more males. But no, it's not making a big difference. One of the problems is the female call is very soft. It was very hard to get a speaker to play it at a reasonable volume. And even then, you can't hear it until you walk right up to the nets. It's not booming away the way the male call does. So it's the audio part of it is problematic too.
Okay. David O'Kine's put in the reference to the paper you mentioned. And so if anyone's interested in that, they can grab that from the chat. So the link he put in the title, which is Does Migration Phenology of Northern Saw-whet Owls vary over time? And then he put the link in there. So if anyone wants to see that paper, you can grab that.
Thanks, David. And the answer is yes.
Yeah.
Spoiler alert.
Yeah. Oh, tricky. So there's a couple people who have Rocky Point who have to go, but the recording will be out there. So if you have people who weren't able to attend, I will split these talks and put them on our website, the Western Bird Banding Association website. So you can see Geoff and Cindy later if you want to revisit these talks. Does anyone have any other questions for Geoff?
No, but there's at least 3 people I'll see for coffee tomorrow morning, so they'll give me the real feedback.
It was okay. Nothing there. Okay, so
can you hear me?
Yeah, we can. Go for it, Lloyd.
Yeah, Lloyd Lewis. We've been hearing through Project Owlnet and others that, quote, the males kind of stay on territory in the breeding area through the winter, and the females and the young migrate. Nothing solid on that, but just a suggestion. Most of what we've been picking up in 6 years of collecting here in the mid-Atlantic are, again, females and young of either sex. So do you have anything have you done any analysis of your data to suggest that the males stay on territory?
I do, and I should have mentioned that when I was talking about the Christmas bird count. So one of my graduate students, Chuck Priestley, did a master's thesis on saw-whets, and he initially was going to put VHF telemetry on them and track them through the winter. The VHF, the transmitters didn't work very well, but virtually all the birds that he caught were males on territory.
Yeah.
So that's what we've told the public, is that we believe the bulk of the birds staying behind are adult males. The female, and their job is to guard a hole in a tree and hope there's enough chickadees for the winter and mice for the summer. And the female's job is to clear out, find somewhere she can survive, come back in the spring, look for a male with a hole in a tree and a bunch of mice. And then the young males are coming back, hoping to find a dead male, a vacant territory that they can occupy, and a female will find him. So sort of 3 or 4 different life history strategies mixed up with what direction are each of these ages and sexes going? Are they all mixing that up too? So I think it could be quite a complicated picture when we finished.
Just a quick comment. I concur with your comment about modus addiction. I think it's the way to go. And it was exciting with just 8 birds, and they went the wrong place. So
right. And I should have pointed out the transmitters are set up to ping every 31 seconds, which means they should last 2 years.
Right.
So we're really looking forward to 2 years of data and having more than so far. We've heard from 16, more than a couple of days from when we tagged them. So that's a third already. So hopefully the 2/3 are lingering somewhere, and they're going to contact us soon.
Very good. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Do we have any other questions?
Oh. Hi to David Brinker. I haven't seen him for a few years.
Isn't it nice to see who's out there? It is.
And I'm not sure I've ever met Bruce Peter John, but I know his name from the banding office. So
right.
That's cool.
Okay. Well, thank you once again for giving this talk, Geoff. I appreciate it. And the Western Bird Banding Association says thank you for joining us. Like I said, I will have these recordings put on our website so you can rewatch them or share them with people who couldn't be here. And if you wish to be joined into the raffle for one of the Western Bird Banding Association t-shirts, I have put the link for the donation button. Anyone who donates $5 or more will be put in for the raffle, and we will see if who wins that. Last week it was Patricia Hegland who won one of the t-shirts. She chose one of the magpie shirts. So anyone who's interested can be entered into the raffle. We will have our next webinar on December 6th And so I'll be sending out notices for that, so you can welcome to join us. And we hope to have these throughout the winter and the spring, not over the holiday season directly, but after that, so that we can keep in touch and before we all head back out in the spring to catch some more birds. And the link does not seem to work. You might need to copy and paste it. It was also in the registration. I will probably send it out. I'll send it out again tonight to everybody so that they can get it in their emails if they wish to join in that. And I won't. I will give everyone an extra day to enter that raffle because of that. Once again, one last chance. Oh, I have one more question. You want to go for it, Judy? You want to add? I didn't see it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
I can, Judy. Go for it.
Okay. I'm wondering if there's any suggestion that the audio lures might be influencing directions of travel or the migration patterns at all.
I doubt it, Judy. The call, you can hear the call for maybe 100 meters, maybe a maximum of 200 meters with really good hearing. So I don't think it would be redirecting a bird. There's no reason to think that, and it's not audible beyond that. So I doubt it would change the direction of migration.
Okay, thanks.
Another quick question. If we registered for this talk, are we on your email list now?
Oh, you're muted, Danny.
I try not to, anyways. Yes, Lloyd, if once you're on there, you'll get notifications of the webinars. And if you choose not to remain on the list, just let me know. I'll take you off. So we don't want to spam you, just want to keep you in the loop.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Yes, I'd like to stay on.
Perfect. And I put a new link in the chat so that if someone wants to try that again, we might have better luck. And Rinkin, go for it.
Yeah, Geoff, just to follow up to your response there to Judy, I think you were talking about us humanoids. I think the saw-whets have a much better ability to hear a much greater range.
Oh,
having said that, so maybe if there was a cluster of audio lures around, it could conceivably confuse the birds. I'm
right.
suggesting.
Yeah, but I mean out here in Alberta, there's a couple of other people, but not within audio sensing. They couldn't hear them that far away, so
yeah,
I don't think
no,
it would redirect their whole migration.
Where I work too. I mean, there's nobody.
Yep.
I'm farther away than you than anybody.
Yeah,
so
in the middle of the lake.
So
yeah,
but if there were a cluster, I think that's an interesting question.
Sure. No. And it's always an important question that, do the tags themselves affect birds? Something we're always questioning ourselves. Putting a tag on, how does that affect the bird? So I'd like to thank Danny and Cindy, and I can't remember as the third person, for organizing the webinar series. It's a great way to share information without having to travel around the continent.
Right. Okay. Well, we're going to sign off then for this evening and hope to see you in December.